Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating, sometimes messy world of organizational behavior. We're going to decode what we like to call the pulse of a team. If you've ever looked around and wondered why one group of people can come together and just crush their goals, while another group with the exact same amount of talent completely crashes and burns, well, you are in the perfect place. We are going to break down the exact dynamics that make successful teams tick. So let's dive right into that exact question. It's actually a question posed by a young professional named Arav to his friend Mira while they were out for a walk. And throughout this explainer, we're going to use their conversation to ground some pretty dense academic theories into real, everyday human experiences. Because the core mystery of organizational behavior really boils down to this. Why do some groups work like magic while others just fall apart? It's not just about individuals working in their own little bubbles. It's about that invisible, electric space between them. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with building a winning team, move into the rhythm of leadership, decode group dynamics, zoom into interpersonal behavior and transactions, and finally, check your group pulse. Let's get right to it. All right, Section 1, Building a Winning Team. From strangers to a unified force. Turning a room full of total strangers into a unified powerhouse doesn't happen overnight. Think of Mira's College Fest committee. They ended up with all these inside jokes, unspoken signals, and total alignment, but it took time. It actually follows a famous framework called Tuckman's model of team development. Teams always start with forming, where everyone is super polite but kinda unsure of what they're supposed to be doing. Then, inevitably, you hit the storming phase. And notice this, that tough phase where people clash and butt heads, it's actually a necessary step. You literally cannot avoid it. You have to push through the storming to reach the magic of norming, where everyone finally figures out their roles. And only then do you unlock the performing stage of high productivity, before eventually adjourning when the project wraps.
Now, once your team actually reaches that sweet performing stage, what keeps it there? It relies heavily on a few structural factors. Clear goals tell everyone the destination, and defined roles clear up the confusion. But at the absolute center of it all, trust. Arav talked about this with his own cricket team. Trust is literally everything. People need to feel safe enough to back each other up, speak their minds, and take a risk without fear of being destroyed if they make a mistake. Without open communication and solid trust, even a team with the clearest goals in the world is going to miss their deadlines.
Moving right along to Section 2, the rhythm of leadership, setting the tempo for the team.
So you really can't have a highly effective, trusting team without someone guiding the ship, right? But leadership isn't just holding a fancy title. Let's contrast two vastly different ways to set a team's tempo. On one hand, you have a transformational mentor, like one Mira had back in college. This person goes way beyond the daily grind. They inspire you. They make you fundamentally believe in your own potential. On the flip side, Arav brought up a transactional manager. This is the kind of leader who is hyper-focused on tasks and rewards. Sure, they might get you to hit your daily targets, but they usually leave you feeling completely disconnected and just sort of distant from the work.
This concept is broken down brilliantly in the Blake and Mouton managerial grid. It basically plots concern for people against concern for production. Think about it. If you're all about production but don't care about your people, you're doing task management. Now, Arav pointed out that this might actually work in a brief high-stress crisis, but man, it burns people out so fast. The real gold standard here, as Mira noted, is team management. That's where you have high concern for the task and high concern for the humans doing it. Pulling that off, though, that requires a ton of emotional maturity.
So how do you actually reach that gold standard of team management? Well, an effective leader has to actively cultivate some key qualities. They need the self-awareness to know their own blind spots, the empathy to really read their team's emotional state, and the ability to balance cold logic with human intuition. As Arav and Mira discussed, a great leader is essentially two things: a mirror that reflects exactly who the leader is, and a window that shows the team what's truly possible. All right, let's slide into Section 3, Decoding Group Dynamics, the invisible rules of the group.
We've talked about leaders and team growth, but what about the invisible forces acting between the team members themselves? Because every group runs on rules. Obviously, there are explicit rules, the official dress code, the HR manual. But what really drives a group's culture are the implicit norms, the unspoken expectations. Mira shared this great example from an internship she did. They had this incredibly respected yet entirely unwritten no phones during meetings rule. Nobody enforced it, everybody just naturally followed it. These implicit norms are the silent architects of your day-to-day work life.
But hey, here is the catch. Going with the flow and seeking harmony can actually backfire terribly. Conformity has a major dark side, and it's called groupthink. This happens when the desire to just get along and be a good team player completely suffocates critical thinking. Arav remembered this one disastrous project that completely tanked, and it wasn't even because the initial idea was bad. It failed simply because everyone wanted to keep the peace, so literally nobody stepped up to point out the giant glaring flaws in the plan.
So how do you know if your team is infected with this? You gotta look for the symptoms. Are people overly confident, acting like the team is invincible? Are they rationalizing away massive red flags? If your team is showing these signs, and especially if you notice people censoring themselves or pressuring the one person who disagrees to just stay quiet, you've got groupthink. And you're missing out on the critical perspectives you need to actually succeed.
The good news is you can absolutely prevent it. You just have to consciously build a culture where disagreeing is safe. A really practical way to do this is to assign a dedicated devil's advocate for big meetings. Literally make it someone's job to poke holes in the plan. You should also be inviting outside opinions regularly and mixing things up by breaking the team into smaller subgroups. Just keep those fresh, unfiltered ideas flowing.
Which brings us to Section 4, interpersonal behavior and transactions, zooming in on the one-on-one. Let's zoom all the way in now, from the big group level right down to the micro level. We're talking about those one-on-one chats. Because how you speak to the person sitting at the desk next to you, that forms the actual heartbeat of your company's culture. To unpack this, we look at Eric Berne's transactional analysis. It's a psychological theory that says during any interaction, you are operating from one of three distinct ego states: the parent, the adult, or the child. You're always wearing one of these three hats. Mira had this fantastic way of explaining it. She said, when my manager scolds me, she's in the critical parent. If I sulk, I'm in the child. And think about it, neither of those reactions is actually getting the work done. The real magic happens when both people can take a breath, step back, and consciously enter the calm, objective, adult state. So when we talk to each other, we're basically just trading these ego states back and forth. And figuring out if your transaction is complementary or crossed is a total game changer. A complementary transaction is productive, like an adult speaking to an adult. But a cross transaction, that's a recipe for conflict. Imagine using adult words, but with the hidden passive-aggressive intent of a sulking child. Once you start recognizing these states, you can stop reacting emotionally and start responding objectively.
Now, tucked inside these transactions are what psychologists call strokes, basically units of recognition. You can give positive strokes, like a compliment, or negative strokes, like blame. And they can be conditional, meaning you only get them if you hit a sales target, or unconditional, which is just valuing someone as a human being. Mira brought up a great point. She thrives on unconditional positive strokes. And honestly, giving those out is one of the absolute best ways a leader can build morale and make their people feel genuinely seen.
And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, checking your group pulse, listening to the rhythm.
As we wrap up this explainer and our walk with Mira and Arav, I want to circle back to our central metaphor. Every single group has a pulse. Sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes it's sluggish, and sometimes it's incredibly strong. Good managers learn to listen to that rhythm, not just the words being said in a meeting. So here is your homework. Turn the mirror on yourself. Ask yourself right now, what role do you play in your groups? Are you a harmonizer, an initiator? When conflict hits, do you respond as an adult or a child? What kind of leader do you admire? And are you actually embodying those traits? Reflect on these questions today, because figuring out exactly how you shape your own team's dynamics is step one to making that group work like magic. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep learning.